Hey everybody, it's EJ from EYEDESYN.com, and in today's tutorial, we're going to be combining two of the biggest new features added to Cinema 4D R20 fields and volumes. We're going to mash them together and use them to create a really cool and easy to do but complex looking little blobby liquid text reveal. Again, using just fields and volumes, and we're going to wrap everything all up in a nice pretty bow by covering a little bit about subsurface scattering materials and how you can add a nice kind of blobby material to your little blobby text. So let's check it out. So here we have just a very simple scene set up. We have ooze with some motext. We have the Frankfurter font, which is a really nice rounded kind of font. But we just have some simple motext. We have a depth of like 60. And for the caps, nothing too crazy, just a fillet cap with a step of 1, radius of about 2 centimeters, and the start and the end. And we're going to create some nice blobby text with this, and then use volumes and fields to kind of make a really cool blobby text reveal. So let's first use these motext objects to create some volumes. So let's grab our aptly named volume builder, and we're just going to select all of our motext objects. Just drag and drop them underneath the volume builder. And you'll see now we have this beautiful voxel mess going on right here. And right now we have a very high voxel size, so we don't have much resolution. So I'm just going to lower that to about 2 centimeters. And I'm kind of going to go through the voxels like you already know it. So if you don't know much about voxels, definitely be sure to check out my tutorial all about the basics of voxels. It's very useful for getting you to understand what is actually going on with the new voxel and volumes workflow. But you can see that with our volume builder, we have all of our motext objects under here, and we can use Boolean modes to add them all together. And the default mode is union. So we're basically combining all of these motext objects together and creating one voxel object. So what we're going to do now is, this isn't looking too good right now. It's not looking too blobby at all. So for that, we're just going to grab a smooth layer. Now, smooth layers act like an adjustment layer from Photoshop or After Effects, where it affects all of the layers underneath. And you can see that immediately we're blurring everything out, blurring those voxels and making everything nice and blobby, and kind of just adjusting the voxel distance here, which is basically how far these voxels are being blurred. And you can see that we're using this Gaussian filter type to blur out our voxels just as we would use Gaussian blur to blur out pixels. So nothing too crazy there. We can increase that distance and make it even more blobbyified or blur it out. But basically, I mean, right here, right now, just using the volume builder with a smooth layer, you have some, bubbly kind of text. And you get it really super fast. But again, if you don't have R20, you can always check out how the old way of how I created some nice bubbly text in an old tutorial with it. But R20 makes all of my old tutorials kind of obsolete and makes everything much, much easier. So it's kind of crazy how much easier R20 makes some of my old tutorials that had many, many steps, just a click of a button like it is now. Anyways, so we have our smooth text. It's not looking too blobby yet. So what we can do to add to our volumes is some drips. And we can do this very easily by, kind of just manually adding some capsules to our volume builder here and just adjusting them, placing them, right within our motext objects here. And you're going to see that they don't look very, uniform or melded together. And that's because I added that capsule, and by default, the capsule is placed above the smooth layer. So again, remember I said smooth layers act like adjustment layers, and everything underneath is affected, but not anything above that smooth layer. So to have the capsule be smooth and be blended with everything underneath, I just placed that capsule underneath, and you see now we got this really nice looking blobby, drippy kind of thing. And we can, manually animate these capsules to create a really cool dripping. But what I'm going to do now is just kind of duplicate this capsule and just manually place all these drips to, look really nice and droopy and drippy. to get some nice drips going on here. So let's just move this maybe over here. Nice little drip there. And this is just the super manual way to do it. You can definitely take a lot more time to do this, but this is kind of the benefit of volumes and how volumes can totally change old workflows where maybe you would do X particles before to build up a whole particle field using objects and filling them in with particles, but now you can do the same, a similar thing using voxels instead, natively in Cinema 4D, and that's all pretty cool. So now I just have a bunch of drips here. Let's just go and just select all of these capsules and just move them all below the smooth layer here. And you can always, and this is the great thing about volume builders, is everything is live. So I can update this after I smoothed everything out. Maybe I want to thicken that. There's some of these little capsules that are so small that they actually got totally blurred out, like this one right here. So I can either make the capsule bigger, or I can go into my volume builder, go to the smooth layer here. And sometimes this is a weird bug. Sometimes you might have to click off of the smooth layer for the options to actually show up. But you can also adjust just the overall strength and the voxel distance to get a little bit more of the detail back. But I think I'm just going to bring the strength down just a little bit. So something like that, maybe 85%, and looking good, okay? So you can spend a lot more time on, fine-tuning this and all that good stuff. But now what we can do is we have this really nice kind of gloopy text with drips. What if we wanted to reveal all of this stuff on? Well, the cool part about volumes in voxels is we can utilize fields along with it and use these Boolean modes to, say, subtract a linear field to have a nice linear wipe to wipe on all of these voxels, and then in effect wipe on this little blobby text that we'll build with the volume mesher at the end of this tutorial. So let's go ahead and grab our linear field. So I'm just going to go to Create, go to Field, and grab a linear field. Now to add this linear field to our volume, I'm just going to drag and drop that underneath our volume builder. And you can see now we have the linear field within our voxel volume builder list. So I can go ahead and again use this, place this underneath the smooth layer and use a different Boolean mode. So instead of just adding to this by having this union mode, I can actually subtract. And what you're going to see is nothing right away, okay? And that's because the creation space of this linear field is only using a box that's the size of 40, 40, 40, okay? And what we actually want to do is say, you know what, the creation space, or the space that I want this linear field to affect, is actually all of the objects in this volume. So I'm going to choose objects here. And you're going to see that something happened on the right side of our text, okay? So what's actually going on here? Well, one thing to know about voxels and building a whole volume here is that we have a whole bunch of options. If you just twirl down this little arrow by the voxel size, we basically have a defined limit of how many voxels are in the actual depth of the voxels inside of this volume of our text. And right now the interior voxel range, or how deep the voxels you can affect on this whole volume are, is just 2. Just a step of 2, and that's actually not very deep at all. But notice what happens when I start increasing the interior voxel ranges. We can actually affect more of those inner voxels, and again, subtract those inner voxels by using this linear field, and maybe crank this to a value of, say, 12 just to be safe. And now check that out. By populating the interior of this volume builder with this bigger interior voxel range, we can now subtract or bool out those interior voxels and get this really cool kind of very simple wipe, like a linear wipe. So instead of using a directional or a direction of this linear field in the positive X, let's do positive Y, or actually let's do negative Y. Let's flip the script, flip the field, and there we go. And now we have this cool little reveal, And, you know, it's okay. You know, this is very linear, and that's kind of the thing is with linear wipes, and you actually see right there, it looks like we have to even increase the interior voxel range there a little bit more. So just 15, and you can see that we're now getting deep enough with our linear field. And this is very boring. Just like any kind of linear wipe, if you want to add more organiciness, which is totally a word, I made it up, but it's officially a word now, organiciness to your linear wipe, just like if you wanted to add some nice organic look to break up the linear nature of a linear wipe in After Effects, what would you do? Well, you would combine that, you know, black and white wipe, linear wipe, with, say, an overlay of fractal noise to break it up. And that's exactly what we're going to do here, only we're going to use a random field to create random noise. That's basically our, you know, After Effects fractal noise, and combine them together, and then use that kind of broken up organic kind of wipe to then wipe this on and off. So the problem is I can't just add a random field and combine it with a linear field, okay? Because we're just kind of limited to Boolean functions. We don't have an overlay. We don't have any blending modes here, okay? So what we're going to do is actually just delete this linear field from this volume builder, okay? And that's actually just going to delete the whole linear field altogether, which is totally fine. But let's go ahead and build this a different way. So what I'm going to do is first grab a group field, okay? And you can think of a group field as almost like a pre-comp layer where you can combine different fields together. So remember I had a linear field, okay? And let's just change that to -y like we had before. Maybe adjust this here, okay? Now what we can do is use this group field. And again, I need to change some of the attributes here. So if I have my group field here, you can see again the creation space is just this tiny box. So instead of box, I'm going to use objects. And right now it's actually adding to the whole volume. So again, I'm going to use subtract. And so now we're back to square one where we had just our linear field. But the benefit of using this group field is now we can add our random field or a shader field with some noise, but I'm just going to use a random field here. And to be able to combine these two together, again, where you can really demystify fields is by thinking of these fields as black and white matte layers. So if we have this random noise here, to combine that with the linear field, we're going to use an overlay, okay? So now you can see we're getting back the linear field, the linear wipe, and then now we can go to our random field, change the random mode to noise, and here we have access to all of the different noise types, which is really awesome from the noise shader. So we can get booyah, we can get dense, all the fun to say names we can grab here. But you can see already we have this nice little organic kind of waviness. I'm just going to toggle the random field on and off. You can see that already adds quite a bit of interest there. So now I can, you know, maybe increase the scale to 180. Now you can see these really nice drips, kind of little drip looking kind of things by just overlaying the random noise on top of our black and white linear wipe here coming from the linear field. And now we can maybe adjust the relative scale. So maybe we want this to be a little bit longer, something like this. So we get this really nice blobby kind of look, which is really awesome. So when we go to move this linear field up and down, and maybe even do this a little bit more slowly, you can see we have this really nice kind of drippy kind of thing going on. And the benefit of using a random field with the random noise is we actually introduce some animation speed to the random noise. So maybe a speed of 1 or 5%. And then when we hit play, you can see that this is actually animating the noise and adding some nice animation or undulation to the noise that we're using in our random field. So group fields allow you to combine different fields together using these different blending modes. And again, these blending modes work exactly like they do in Photoshop or After Effects. So you can always, think back to the blending modes there. And just like you would add an overlay of a fractal noise to a linear wipe to, make it non-uniform or linear, do the same thing here. And so now we have this group field combined or subtracting everything underneath. Now to create a nice little wipe, we can just keyframe this linear field from being, in the position Y, 150 centimeters. Let me just move this keyframe back to 0 and maybe make this a, 1 second wipe. So I'll just bring this on down and then just set a new keyframe. And there we go. We have this really nice wipe. Now you can, always adjust the random field. You can also adjust, say, the inner offset to make this even sharper of a kind of blobby kind of wipe. You can even increase the size of the linear field so we get even more drippy kind of looking things. Kind of like that, drippy kind of looking things. So there we go, we got a really nice wipe. But at the end of the day, we just have some volumes at this point. And if we go to render, we're not going to see anything at all but my little orange background that I already have there. That's because we just have voxels. And voxels, like splines, don't render unless we actually create some geometry using those volumes. So to transform this volume, the volume builder into a volume mesh, we're just going to select the volume builder, go to our volume mesher, and to make this volume mesher a parent of the volume builder that we have selected, I'm just going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and that's a nice little handy shortcut key to be able to add that object as a parent of the selected object you have there. And so there's our volume mesher. You can see that. Let me just hide this random field here from view. I'm just going to double click the little stoplight so we don't get that big noise view widget in our viewport anymore, kind of fudging up our view. So now we can use things to help this smooth out even more. So this is kind of a thing I like to do with the volume mesher, is maybe grab a smoothing deformer and place that right underneath the volume mesher, and check out how much smoother this kind of makes the whole mesh there. So there's a distinction between smooth layers in the volume builder. The smooth layer in the volume builder is blurring out the voxels, whereas the smoothing deformer is actually smoothing out the resulting geometry, or the resulting mesh from our volume mesher. So it's kind of doing two different things. So the smoothing deformer and the smoothing layer, you can kind of adjust them independently, but they're both editing different things. So one's editing voxels, smoothing out the voxels, and one is smoothing out the actual geometry. So another thing we can do to make this a little bit more blobby is add another deformer, like a displace deformer, and add some noise in here, and just increase the strength, or increase the size, and maybe get a booyah. Can I get a booyah? There we go. There's a booyah. Actually, booyah is not going to work, but it is fun to say. Maybe a Luca. You can just play around with all different types of noises here to get the kind of look that you want. Maybe we click this little button there. Get some sparse convolution there. That sounds extremely fancy pants and like it should help a lot there. So let's do that. And then we can also go into the displacer and maybe just, bring down the height a little bit. But you can see that adds some nice, extra blobby nature to our text. And again, this displacer is acting upon the volume mesh, or the actual geometry that we are building from our volume builder there. Okay, so now when we go back and forth, we're actually building on a actual geometry here, which is really, really cool. So another thing you can do with the volume mesher, and it's one of the couple options in here, but one is if, what you just meshed with the volume mesher, if it's really, like if you hit play and it's really bogging down your scene here, one thing to do that's really handy is using this adaptive little slider here. And what this is doing, if I go into my garage shading lines, so what the adaptive is actually doing is removing the polygon count to be able to speed this up, okay, in your playback. And just need to remember that when you're ready to render, to crank that back to 0. So wherever you have it, I'm just going to right click on these little arrows to get that back to default. And there you go. Another thing we can do that's really cool is we can maybe make this thicker by adjusting this voxel range threshold. So if you bring it above 50%, it's going to thicken it. And if you bring it below 50%, it's actually going to shrink it back a little bit. So you can, play around with this little option here. And just remember that the default is 50%. Again, I'm just going to right click these arrows to go back to 50%. And there you go. So now that we have our really nice looking reveal here, and we could spend a lot more time on this, but it's looking pretty blobbyified. Let's add a really nice blobby texture to this. So what I'm going to do is just double click, make a new material. Let's rename this blobby material. And let's double click and open this material editor. Let's choose like a lime green kind of thing like that. Let's go to our luminance, and to get some really nice kind of slime type of look, we're going to add some subsurface scattering. It's right there at the bottom, but add some subsurface scattering. And where you add subsurface scattering for it to work is in the luminance channel. Let's go into our subsurface scattering shader, and let's just add that lime green color back in here. And basically what the subsurface scattering, say that 5 times fast, holy crap. What subsurface what SSS does is allows for the effect of light to pass through and illuminate the inner part of your object. So we're getting much more kind of a slimy, blobby type of surface than we did before if I just toggle this on and off. So it's allowing light to pass through into the volume and kind of illuminate from the inside. So what we can do is maybe make this even more pronounced and say up the strength to say 150. And then we have this path length, which is basically how much light can actually penetrate through our object. And you can see that we have this nice representation of this candle. If I bring the path length to a lower level or lower length, you can see that it's getting a little darker on the inside. And while I'm talking about this, let me actually just apply this to my volume mesher, and let's just close this up, make this a little smaller, and just render and see what that looks like right there. You can see that this is looking pretty bright at this point. So a lot of this is going to depend on the lights in your scene. So if I just turn on a couple of these lights here, this is just a typical 3-point light setup. Just one on the overhead, one to the side, one in the background, kind of illuminating it from the back here. So something like that. And if I render this now, based on the lights, and they also have, area shadows turned on, it looks completely different. So what you do here is going to depend a lot on what lights you have in your scene, because this is an effect, subsurface scattering, hey, I said it right that time, is dependent on where the light sources are coming from, okay? So let's leave the path length at that, and let's just twirl down some of these options here, the red, green, and blue. Basically what the RGB values here allow you to do is to multiply the strength of certain colors that are represented in the inner part of the volume of your object. So if I want this green to be really pumped up, I can just increase that, and you can see a lot of green is being represented in that lit up inner part of our little surface or little volume there. Okay, so let me just turn on interactive render region here so we can see what this looks like when we're adjusting all of these options here. So there we go. We have our green really cranked up. Here's if it's not cranked up at all. You can see that it's less pronounced. So let's crank up the green. Let's crank up the blue. A little bit of red, maybe even more red. And we get some kind of, yellows in there. And, basically you can get some really, really cool looks by just, cranking up some of the hue values here. Now to make this render even faster, we can go into the multiple tab and just turn on fast evaluation, and bam, look how fast that evaluated. It really does what it said. It quickly evaluates everything. So now I can, just keep adjusting these things, and it updates really fast. But yeah, that's basically all the options I really mess around with in the subsurface scattering here. Again, if you really want this even more pronounced, maybe crank up the strength to 200%, and you can see this is much brighter. And again, upping the path length allows the light to pass through and illuminate the inner bits of our ooze as well. So let's just make this some very shiny ooze. So I'm just going to remove the specular, add some Beckman reflection. Let's leave the roughness at about 10%, and let's bring the overall strength of this reflectance layer to, maybe 60% there. Let's go to the layer for now, because right now it looks like the shiny Terminator guy, the liquid Terminator guy. Let's just go and change this for now to dielectric and make this look a little bit more PET or like plasticky, I guess. And there we go. We got more of that underlying color coming through. And let's just give this color maybe a little bit of yellow, so we have like yellowish hue to really add to our reflection. So this is looking a lot better. Maybe make this even more yellowish. So there we go. So again, a lot of what your subsurface scattering is going to be is dependent on all your lights. If I turn off all my lights, you're going to see that this looks completely different. So this is when really getting your lighting nailed in is going to do really well. This is with just like the overhead light hitting it, that looks kind of cool. And then let's maybe turn on the side light. But there we go. We now have this really nice reveal, blobby reveal of our motex by using a combination of fields and volumes, which I would have to say is the best combination since peanut butter and jelly. I mean, come on. All right, so hopefully that gives you a really good idea of how you can start to use fields with volumes to create some really kind of complex looking animations just very super easily. And I think that's just the overlying power of Cinema 4D R20 is it brings all these really kind of technical looking things to your fingertips very, very easily. It's not very hard to do. So if you have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, be sure to leave them in the comments section below. If you create anything with any of the fields and volumes workflows that I discussed in this tutorial, I love to see them. So be sure to share them with me on Twitter, on Facebook, all of the interwebs. Please share them with me. I'd love to see what you guys are coming up with. And one of the best places and new places to be able to share your work, ask me questions, and interact with other people in the EYEDESYN community is my brand new EYEDESYN Tutorials Facebook group. So be sure to sign up and get added to this group. I hope to see you there. And as always, I really appreciate all of the comments, all of the compliments, and just everyone watching the tutorials and learning. It really inspires me to keep doing this. So really appreciate all of the support that you give every single time I post a tutorial. So keep it coming, and I'll keep doing this for you guys as well. So hope you guys enjoy this one. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.